Oh no, it's a piece of cake. You'll get through there. It's easy shit. Yeah, it'll be great. We'll start at 4. Be done in a couple hours. Me and Tim did it on our dirt bikes 11 years ago. I remember it being really easy. Never trust a fart. Never trust Brett at Lockhart Basin.
Hey, thanks for joining Paul and I. We just got back from Lockhart. Really, Paul? Seriously? That's how we're going to do this?
That's how it's going to roll, yep.
All right. Hey, thanks for joining Paul and I. We just got back from Lockhart Basin. And when we do training for riders, we spend a lot of time talking about motorcycle protection. And skid plates is always a major topic. And because we just took the bikes through Utah Lockhart Basin, we have a lot to talk about. Paul did change up his stock skid plate, obviously, because the joke of a skid plate that comes
dinner
on that
plate, I call it.
Yeah, that's kind of a joke. So he did have an upgrade on his, and I also changed some. So we'll talk about what worked for us and what didn't happen. I don't care if a skid plate gets dented or dents. That's a great place for energy to go. But I do care when it damages my exhaust or the bottom of the engine. If I pop a hole in it, that's a problem. I did go with Blackdog. I've used them before. Paul and I have had great success with the Blackdog. Kurt almost builds them too heavy to a fault. I mean, I think they're made for IEDs. You can go through the Middle East and blow something up underneath the bike, and you're probably not going to damage the skid plate. You and the bike might disappear, but the skid plate's going to be intact. I did end up bending the rear mount, which always impresses Kurt. This one mounts to the rear frame, and then it has a steel bar that goes across on both sides. And if you look inside, you can see I have a nice little U shape in there, and I have a nice dent across the back, just underneath where the catalytic converter is. But it's not very deep. It's kind of shallow. You can see where I have some gouges and some dents up on the front. This plate is very reinforced and very thick. Fantastic build. It's a heavy skid plate. I mean, tremendously heavy, like half the weight of the motorcycle heavy, but it did its job. No damage to the engine, no damage to the exhaust. And again, what I really like about it is I want something that is going to do the job. And the skid plate's one of the places where weight isn't a problem. It's the lowest part on the bike. Any other skid plate I would have put on this would have been absolutely trashed. But
speaking of trashed,
yeah, so how'd yours do?
So I had swapped out the stock dinner plate and went with this is made by GIvi. I opted for this one. I had a Blackdog on my old GSA, and I loved it. And I was learning, and I bashed the crap out of it, and it held up just fine. I opted to try to go a little lighter this time because I thought I was a better rider. I found out that I'm not.
In your defense, you rode Lockhart Basin on a 1200GS
on a tractor, yeah.
with less ground clearance, significantly less suspension. And
a lot more weight. You can go ahead and say it.
and your bike likes to go through things, not over things.
This skid plate took a beating. You can see where it's dented. It's almost ground the rivets off in a couple of spots on the corners here, which aren't actually corners anymore. They sort of flattened out. This used to actually bend up where this was parallel to or perpendicular to the ground. But it hit so hard that it actually pushed the whole thing back.
It's completely flat in this upper corner.
Yeah.
That is trash.
It's flattened out. Well, and you can see that it got pushed back almost an inch because that's where the bolts were hitting after I sheared all of them off.
Now, does this one replace the bracket on the bike itself, or does this still go to the engine?
No, it still goes to the engine, but it uses those, which are significantly more robust than the stock ones, but it's still just a little shear bolt.
Now, did those shear off? Well, yeah, they
all
did.
Three of them.
Yeah, because it was clanking when we were
right, which is why I have this piece of tape, because I had to tie the skid plate to the frame to hold it up so it wouldn't be flopping as I rode down the highway to get back home.
But we're doing things that are very serious, and that's why you went with the Blackdog before. That's why I've used them before.
So I'm getting a Blackdog again because I'm sure you're going to drag my ass back down there one more time.
Well, if I can. That was a blast. Other than the fact that you almost died, but other than that, it was fantastic. And this bike this bike was so much fun out there. All right, so the question is, because we don't care the condition of the skid plate, what happened to the bike?
Well, so I had just replaced my headers because on these sat just above the skid plate, so that was the part that was exposed, and I got a pretty good dent there, and I got some rock dings on this side, and so I picked up a set of headers, and so I had brand new headers on there. See how nice and shiny they are?
Beautiful.
Yeah, they were. And you can see now I have actually creased the bottom of this one right before the crossover tube, and that was under the skid plate. That was part of it. That was the skid plate hitting it, because that part is actually underneath. So that was from the skid plate coming up and hitting it. So I'm actually I'm glad them little bumpers held on long enough to not punch a hole through the case with some of that crap we went over, or I didn't damage the front of the engine case either.
What's your thoughts on skid plates now? What are you going to recommend to other people?
If you are going to be riding where there's obstacles, whether it's logs or rocks or anything that you're going to be crawling over, especially while you're learning and developing the technique, get the heaviest, most robust skid plate that you can.
When I look at a skid plate, I'm looking at how many places it has to attach to and to reinforce, and that's what I really don't like. This one had, the Blackdog that I'm running has the pad underneath it, so there's the skid plate, and it has a pad it's there, so even when it hits compression, it still has that advantage of being an engine mounted skid plate, but without the shear factor, so that when it does impact, it's hitting that plastic, which is also working like a bumper.
Right,
so
to disperse the energy.
Yeah, so I get the flex, plus I get the bumper, and then obviously, I want the protection, the impact. And Lockhart Basin was...
I don't want to talk about it. Still seeing my counselor.
Yeah, well, we had some of the... Oh my God, after dark, it was... Those boulders we were riding over in dark were insane. And I know you had been plowing on those rocks way harder than I was.
Yeah.
A little more weight on the bike.
Well, a little more weight, a little less ground clearance. And once it got dark, I was doing really good during the daytime of picking cleaner lines so that I wasn't abusing it. But once the sun went down and I started getting tired, that kind of all went out right out the window.
One of the criticisms I've been hearing people say about the 790R, they don't like the idea of the fuel tank hanging down so low. These outer plastic guards that go outside that skid plate handled fantastically, and the fact that they flex when you impact them worked really well. I am not regretful that I've left off any additional metal bars or protection or anything like that.
Flex?
Not
no
flex. Well, and that and to be honest, when we were riding through the basin, I think some of the advantages I have, because I had marks on the bags where I had hit rocks. I had marks on the plastic where I'd hit rocks, and unlike some of the other bikes where I had bars on, when I hit those rocks, I stopped, or I was heavily
this
deflected.
You just kind of deflect off them.
Yeah.
It absorbs the energy and then rebounds it back out.
Yeah. So I'm not in regret.
Because I just noticed that I actually bent my engine guard too, because it's touching the head cover.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and you had a harder time. Your bike hit the ground a couple of times, and I was watching some of the video. We didn't get all of it, but a lot of the video was, you could see where you were being deflected off the front tire and off track, and that's part of the reason you were coming down.
Yeah.
So I have a lot more choices, with this bike, and that's one of the things I didn't like about my 1200 is I would look at a hill, there'd be a left track, right track, and center track, and the center track would be the worst one, but I couldn't go left or right because I'd plowed the cylinder heads into the walls or rocks.
We got to that one little canyon, that downhill section,
right down 15F Hill.
Yes,
right into S Canyon.
Yes, that would be the one. But yeah, I mean, the cleanest line down through there, I couldn't take that. I didn't fit, and there was no way we could, clean up the boulders or move stuff out of the way because it was, a mountain.
Well, and I was able on this one to go over and then pick clean lines just because of the ground clearance, because of the suspension travel, and you just didn't have that. So between all the limitations of the bike, and then you add in all the limitations of the impact, you know, that deflection that you got when you were hitting rocks. They were throwing you off or knocking you down, where, you know, this, you know, I never dropped the bike. I didn't, you know, I went through. There were a few times I had expletives just describing my thoughts of the situation.
I'm glad I wasn't mic'd up.
But it did not go down. And you know, and of course that makes it a lot harder for you, because now you're dealing with more weight, more challenge, and it just wears you out, more fatigue.
Yeah, and picking the bike up is just that much more fatigue, just compounding the initial problems we were having to start with.
Yeah, you were pretty whooped by the end of the night.
My ass was whooped.
Yep. We do recommend having skid plates that mount to the engine or the motorcycle frame rather than to the engine, if that's available or a possibility. Some systems, like MotorTech, they'll make a crash bar system that triangulates on the bike, and then the skid plate mounts to that, because not all bikes have a frame at the bottom, and that's a wonderful design. Blackdog Cycleworks is the one I'm using now. He regularly will go back to the frame and mount there. And we've even seen TourTech and some of the other brands take advantage of that as well. But you'll look at, it's not about the brand, it's about how well it works on the bike, how well it fits. Any other pointers for skid plates, or does that kind of wrap it up?
No, I think that's I think that pretty well sums it up. Yeah, if you're going to skimp on the upper crash bars, because if you've got a decent skid plate, that can absorb the energy, and hopefully that part won't be touching the ground. That part's definitely going to touch the ground.
Yeah, most bikes that's plastic. You know, it's not, if your radiator's exposed, that's different, but most of the time up top is just body work and cosmetics. And when you're on the trail, the whole point is don't get stuck. That's it. That's all I got.
Right on.